Karl Marx is perhaps one of the most influential philosophers of the West, and he was born in Germany. He was German, and he also has a Jewish heritage. And perhaps if there are anti-Semites who are listening to this, perhaps you can throw your remarks against the Jews, against Karl Marx, or perhaps against the bankers, pointing the finger to the bankers. Oh, they control everything. The bloody Jews control everything. Yes, Jew, you Jew. Karl Marx has Jewish heritage. And he not only influenced Germany, but he also his influence extended to most parts of the world today. And if you can listen to my last lecture, I did talk about Karl Marx's influence across the globe, how it started from Germany to the east and to the farthest parts of the earth, such as the Caribbean and the Americas. And this man, who is known for his exotic hairstyle and beard, was dissatisfied with the capitalist mode of production. And the reason why, in which I believe everybody would be dissatisfied with the capitalist mode of production, if it cannot suffice for one's own basic necessities. And surely I would understand that. And perhaps those who are of the working class do understand the struggles of living in a capitalist society in terms of surplus value, in terms of commodities, in terms of surviving for simple basic necessities, in which if you live in an advanced area such as California, then perhaps you would have a difficult time. You would have a real capitalist struggle within that within that region, since California is indeed a place where it is difficult to survive, and it's quite difficult to get even a basic job. And perhaps people still have the idea of the American dream. People travel to America to work and stuff like that, and that is very true. Yet employers take forever to hire, even in the most basic positions. Or perhaps they don't even call you. You'd have to follow up and things of that sort. Then you go through an interview and perhaps you won't even get the job. And it's the most basic job ever. Perhaps a McDonald's franchise is not even hiring. Or perhaps it is hiring. Well, actually, perhaps it's not hiring. And you call the same bloody franchise for the past year and you ask for a job at Burger King or McDonald's, and or perhaps McDonald's, we'll go with McDonald's, and they don't give you, and they said that they'll be open in the next couple of weeks, but they'll be hiring in this time and that time, and then you end up calling them after this time and that time, and then they said that, and then they said they're not hiring, and so you go through other jobs and everything of that sort, and now what about the state in which they would provide the basic necessities of a living creature, of a living Homo sapien? in California that is quite difficult. In the United States, it is quite difficult. So, even in the United States, you still have to struggle some way or somehow. And what I do, like, I can go back to I can correlate this to the Nordic model in Scandinavia, where both the unemployed and employed are taken care of. And that is a very Marxist view, to take care of both the unemployed and the employed, since it is all about the people, regardless of what country one is from. It is all about the people as to what God you so fancy that you put your trust in, metaphysics, a metaphysical being which one hasn't even seen, or perhaps believes based on faith. It is all about the people, despite your skin color, despite the language that you speak. That is why it's important to understand the struggle for Palestine, understand that Palestine is under colonial oppression by a Zionist government. And I don't speak off of a base of from a certain perspective. I'm just simply stating the facts. And since we're talking about Karl Marx, I might as well speak about hegemonic activities that are currently going on in our world today, such as Israel and Palestine, the whole issue there. And perhaps one can say the same with other countries as well. What's going on in I don't know about that, but the Ethiopian kind of place there, that there's a whole war going on there as well. I believe it might be fighting for land or something of that sort. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not too familiar with that subject, but there's a whole lot of wars going on these days. And the biggest one is Israel and Palestine, and that is due to colonialism, a Zionist colonization of what was once known as Palestine is no longer Palestine, but it'll always be called Palestine because it is the original land of the Palestinians. You can't. It is historical fact. It is historical fact. It is from history that the entire land of that region is called Palestine. And Karl Marx was a big fan of colonialism as well. He was a big fan of it. And he was also a big fan of hegemony in terms of discussing it, not of actual implementation of it. And he not only saw oppression from all sides of the coin, from economic oppression to imperial oppression. And imperial oppression, it could be both economic, and it could also be both imperial in the sense of kingship. I don't know if I would like to talk about this, but I was once on a group. Perhaps I will talk about it. I was once on a group in Facebook, and I talked about Islamic imperialism, and I believe it was in a group called Marxist Think Tank, and I got a few people who liked it because they understood what I was talking about. But I got a lot of but a majority of people were very critical of my remarks in regard to the country of the Maldives. And how it clearly demonstrates Islamic imperialism. And people in the Marxist think tank were criticizing me, saying, "What is this guy talking about? What is Islamic imperialism? This guy is what? You're from America. Liberate your people first." They're pointing the finger at me and putting me down and things of that sort. They were literally criticizing my remarks in regard to the Maldives, that the Maldives is under Islamic imperialism. And they were confused as to, what do you mean by Islamic imperialism? That's not even a word. Well, as an English literature major, words are constructed by us. The reason why words exist is because we construct them in the first place. But there were only a few people in that group who understood what I had to remark in regard to the Maldives and Islamic imperialism, and the others were just critical about my heritage of me being from the United States, and them not being familiar with the term Islamic imperialism. They were so anally hurt that they could not get the dildo that was stuck up their anus out of their anus. And I feel very bad for them, because I understand that you have homosexual tendencies, but I never intended to stick a dildo up your anus in the first place. I simply wanted to bring an issue to light that has been minorly shown, and the only place that you can find this issue at light is in the Human Rights Watch, in which the Maldives suffers Islamic oppression. Oh, is Islamic oppression not a term? Is Islamic oppression not a phrase? It clearly is. It clearly bloody is. In which women have suffered a lot in the country there. And a lot of individuals have suffered due to Islamic extremism there. And just being under an Islamic or theocratic government, one suffers many oppressions. The same as being under a Christian government or a Jewish government or whatever other government that there is. Wherever there is not a place where freedom of belief can be practiced, then that is horrendous in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of belief, in which the separation of church and state must happen. And so, I don't know if Karl Marx would feel that I shoved a dildo up his anus, but I hope he would not feel that way if I told him about the Islamic imperialism that is occurring in the Maldives. But these individuals, I don't know. Islamic imperialism is a thing. You have to understand. Do I really have to explain myself when I say Islamic imperialism? Okay, perhaps I do to people who don't understand. Okay, yes, imperialism, yes, it is a ruling party of whatever, okay, and if it's ruled by Judaism or Islam, okay, you can just put Islamic imperialism. It's as simple as that. I don't understand why you feel that the dildo is up your anus. I just don't understand. I just don't understand. Why is it that the dildo has to be kept in your anus? You can literally just remove it and accept that the English language is created only by the people, and it is very proletarian and Marxist. It is only by the people. How else can we conduct a successful revolution unless it is by the people? How else can we construct and preserve and create new words in the English language, or even create language in the first place, or the English language in the first place, unless the people have done it? Aren't you oppressing me? Aren't you being hegemonic to me? How anti-Marxist is that? And you adhere to Marxism, and you're being hegemonic and colonial and oppressive to me, critical to me. You know, the Buddha talked about ignorance is one key of suffering, and it surely has, its truth in that matter. Ignorance may sometimes be bliss, but ignorance can also sometimes be hegemonic and violent, mentally violent, that is, linguistically violent, that is. And that's fine. That's fine. I just move on in life and deal with it. And perhaps Karl Marx would also say the same thing as well. Just move on. Move on. It's okay. That is how how can we conduct a successful proletarian revolution? A successful proletarian state. The complete abolition of the bourgeoisie if we are stuck up in our mental unfair hegemonic criticisms from supposed Marxists. How can we proceed forth to have a successful proletarian state? We cannot if we are stuck up in their critiques, their hegemonic and oppressive and idiotic, imbecilic critiques. Now, Karl Marx not only wrote his work and critique of his work called Capital, in which is 3 volumes. I still have yet to complete it. But he is most notably known for his work along with his comrade Friedrich Engels of the work called The Communist Manifesto, and in which it explains the history of humanity and talking about different kinds of laborers, plebeians, and things of that sort. And it talks about the proletarian and the bourgeoisie. The proletarian are those who are the wage laborers, in which we have worked for a certain amount of time, and perhaps we have been paid less than what was due. We cannot live properly due to the one who is in control of the money giving us the money after work, and okay, we can't live a basic life, just the most basic life. We can't afford a house anymore. We can't eat food anymore. We can't pay our car bills and the heater bills and the water bills, and there are just bills upon bills upon bills upon bills in a capitalist society, apparently, in which you can't even live off of $20 an hour, and you can't pay your basic necessities and things of that sort. All right. And Marx talks about this. He talks a lot about the wage laborer and the one who's in charge of the wages. And it is a reality that is very true, not only in the United States, but also as well in other countries outside. If it happens in the United States, imagine outside of the United States, especially in places like Asia or Africa, in which horrendous things probably would occur compared to here, a lot worse than here. Since at least here you can literally live inside religious temples for free, if ever you know how to survive. Survival is about knowledge. You need to know in order for you to survive. You can't survive without knowing. How epistemological is that? Quite so. Quite so. And Marx is also known for a lot of other works as well. And his influence has extended across other countries, as I've mentioned, such as China and Russia and Vietnam and Cambodia, for the love of Jove, in a misinterpreted way, actually. In Cambodia, I talked about Cambodia being a anti-Marxist, Marxist place under the guise of communism, of a Nero-like tyranny in which it ruled and reigned, killing Chinese and intellectuals and people who simply wore glasses. Imagine that. You wore glasses and you're done for. Perhaps they kept the girls that look good in glasses alive. That was the big reason why a lot of Cambodians fled from Cambodia to live in California, because of the Khmer Rouge massacre. And perhaps Marxism and communism has had a very bad impact on Cambodian people because of the massacre that happened. So, ideologies, especially Marxism, can have both positive and negative impacts on the people, depending on how people use the ideology. If a person uses the ideology in a positive way, then it's going to have a positive impact. But if you use it in a negative way, it's going to have a negative impact. Just the negative impact, like I said, in Cambodia. Completely negative, of course, because it has nothing to do with Marxism, but Nero-like tyranny, under the mask of Marxism and a communist flag of the hammer and the sickle, the red flag and the yellow emblem of the hammer and the sickle. And killing people who are not pure Cambodian blood, that's more Hitlerian than Marxist. That's more Nazi-like than Marxist. And it is more Nero-like than Marxist or Hitlerian, because it takes things to the very extreme. To the very extreme. You go to Cambodia today, you're able to see the museum there of a bunch of bones and skeletons and skulls, all due to the torturing of Cambodians by the Khmer Rouge. The only nice thing about the Khmer Rouge, or Cambodia's communist regiment, were their music. Their music is catchy and beautiful and melodic and nice. But they themselves were not nice. Just their music. The only positive thing about them was the music. And perhaps an interesting thing about Pol Pot, the leader of Khmer Rouge, was that he kind of resembles Elon Musk today. And yeah, of course, that's due to the memes that are floating around across the internet of Pol Pot looking like Elon Musk. Just search Khmer Rouge Cambodian Pol Pot Elon Musk lookalike on YouTube or somewhere on online. You'll find a lot of resemblances and hilarious memes of Elon of that. So I personally think it's hilarious as well. I've been told by so many people that I've looked like Elon Musk, and I completely... Okay, I would love to meet the guy and take a photo of him together, and perhaps he would post it on Twitter, and since that would get a lot of good views, I know that will, and perhaps a lot of people would enjoy that, because since I've been told I look like him by so many people, I can just double the amount of the remarks of me looking like him by triple fold or quadruple fold or pentadruple fold on his Twitter account, since he owns Twitter and everything. And not only that, but you could also say that I've got a house in Texas. I've got a place in Texas. And that all my exes live in Texas. That's why I hang my hat in Tennessee. Going back to Marx, his influence had the most negative impact in Cambodia, and his influence has had a positive impact in most places of the world, actually. Now, I can also give you more negatives about it, in which I would love to talk about the negatives, because you have to understand a culture and a people. If you ever talk to them about Marxism and things of that sort, you want to be careful as to which people you talk to about this specific ideology, okay? Because I don't want you going around start talking to people talking about the Communist Party of this and that, and then suddenly people are going to look at you weird and funny in that country when it's all about liberating the people from oppression, and then suddenly now there's somebody who's looking at you like you're some crazy terrorist individual who just wants to look for trouble. So I'm going to talk. I'm going to tell you about the who you should talk to in regard to Marxism and things of that sort. So I want to talk about the negatives and also in regard to the culture. So the people that you want to be careful talking about Marxism are people from the Philippines and perhaps people from Thailand and perhaps, well, especially people in the Philippines. It's a currently active thing going on there, and you want to also be careful to talking about it with people in perhaps some parts of Southern America, like Peru, for example, in which there is a lot of the shining path in Peru was a common. I don't know if it still is, but it was a common or is a common guerrilla fight. I believe they're guerrilla fighters in that region, and especially in the Philippines, they are also guerrilla fighters. The Communist Party of the Philippines, and the same with Peru. Which Peru has the shining path, and perhaps they've received negative connotations in their society as deemed and coined as terrorists by the current ruling class of that nation, and it's completely understandable. So if you're talking to a Peruvian or perhaps a Filipino, you want to be careful in regard to the Communist Party of this and that, and because it has negative connotations in those countries. So you want to be mindful about that if ever you decide to just walk up to a Filipino or Peruvian and start talking about Marxism, start talking about stuff like that. Perhaps you can intellectualize with them or philosophize with them in terms of working and wage labor, and okay, because the Philippines does suffer economic oppression as well, and it's very difficult to live there, which is why a lot of women resort to prostitution and being whores, and it is a common thing there. So, and it happens in America too. Don't get me wrong on that. That it does not happen in America. It does happen in the United States. Just go to Las Vegas, in the streets there, and Los Angeles, and perhaps San Francisco, and big cities. You'll find a lot of women dressed with less clothes on the streets, looking for a couple of bucks to please their man. So, as you see, the rabbit hole goes very deep in this lecture. It goes very deep, since Marxism goes deep into the deep it goes deep into all of societies across the world. It goes quite deep. It goes quite deep indeed. So Peru and the Philippines are the only things that I can think about in my head. And when we jump to other countries outside of the United States, or perhaps outside of Germany, or perhaps that have not necessarily had a huge influence on that Marxism had necessarily had an influence on, but what I can kind of correlate to is Scandinavia and their Nordic model. As I said, they take very well. They take care of both the unemployed and the employed. I don't know if that's true until today. Perhaps you can enlighten me if I'm ignorant in that light, or if I'm missing something in that regard, but I humbly accept correction. I don't know everything, so I humbly accept correction if you can tell me if anybody knows about the Nordic model or how life is in Scandinavia in regard to that. But it is a very Marxist thing to take care of both the unemployed and the employed. It's looking after those individuals. It is looking after the people. It is looking after the people, and that is exactly what Marxism is about. It is about the freedom of people from oppression. And there are a lot of forms of oppression, as I've said. The very first form of oppression is economic oppression, in which Marx was very keen about. He was very keen about capitalism, and he knew about the difficulties and hardships and the nature of capital and capitalism. And we also can talk about colonialism as well, in which colonialism was another, is another form of oppression, in which Marx talks about as well. And it is no stranger to Marx. Colonialism is no stranger to Marx, as is no stranger to Uncle Ho back in Vietnam, or Ho Chi Minh, who is the father. He's passed away, but who is the father of modern day Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh was influenced by. He was a Marxist Leninist, and Ho Chi Minh was a very keen individual when it comes to Marxism and colonialism. He was very keen about the colonial devil of France colonizing Vietnam, and he liberated his people using Marxist-Leninist principles or Leninist principles. Very obvious that, yeah, Marxism is about the liberation of all peoples. Doesn't matter. It's not about oppressing more people. It is about liberating the people. And Ho Chi Minh was a living example of that. And I can also say that Pol Pot was not a living example of that. He was a horrendous example of Marxism, Leninism, or Marxism. Horrendous. How can such a man even exist? Well, of course, humans are humans. We'll do whatever we want to do. Just look at Nero putting Christians on the streets and using them as lamps to light the streets. I mean, how human is that? We humans have done the most horrendous things, of course, going back to perhaps prehistoric times. We have there was one tribe, I believe, who hunted after other humans and ate them. I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, Papua New Guinea used to be like that until the Christians came and missionaried them and told them that there is another world and another hope to look after, and a man named Jesus Christ for you to believe in and change you and turn and repent from your sins and things of that sort, in order to live a new life and stop cannibalizing each other, or foreigners, or whatever they cannibalized, or whoever they cannibalized. So when Marx was all about the liberation of the people. And he, as I said, mentions different terminology, in which is very critical for us to learn about, and that those terminologies included are proletarian, or the proletariat, or bourgeoisie, or the bourgeois. And the bourgeois and the bourgeoisie are those upper class individuals. Perhaps you can think of them. You could do we like stereotypes, or do we not love stereotypes? I mean, the blonde girl in Starbucks with her coffee or whatever, or a blonde girl in America saying words such as like, literally, like, so, literally, totally, like. And we could stereotype a bourgeoisie or a bourgeois person who could have a nice tuxedo and stands up tall and pompous, and perhaps has a top hat and a mustache, and talks in a posh manner. Perhaps today we will have a nice, delightful. We will savor a nice supper in a nice restaurant in Upper New York, in Manhattan, with their cane and walking cane and things like that. So perhaps we could stereotype things like that, and the proletarian and the proletariat perhaps wear raggedy clothes and are working in factories, and perhaps do we not love stereotypes? Perhaps if you do not love stereotypes, I sure bloody do. I love stereotypes. They're one of the they're one cultural mark in which marks humor and comedy, even though the topic may be serious, for example. And I also want to be clear as well that Marxism is a science. It is not leftism or wokeism as we know today as from the political left. They're completely different things. Marxism is a science. Marxism-Leninism is a science. It is separate from the leftist, wokist movement of today in the United States and perhaps globally, wherever it is, as long as they're human beings, Homo sapiens. Then it is completely separate and completely different, and that is an important distinction to make. Now, when it comes to colonialism is a huge part, as I said, of Marx. And Marx and his partner Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto together. If you haven't seen The Young Karl Marx, the film that was made in 2017, it's literally on archive.org. I mean, it should be. It's such a Marxist thing to imagine having to purchase it. No. It should be free. It should be free. Imagine buying the Communist Manifesto, or imagine buying the young Karl Marx, Der Hunger. I believe in German it's called Der Hunger Marx or something of that sort. since the original film was in German, and I mean the actor is pretty good. The Karl Marx's wife is pretty good, and the whole cast of the movie was pretty interesting, especially Marx and Engels and his and Marx's wife. It just shows you about his life and things that sort of what his life was like. The Young Karl Marx, I believe, is the name of the movie back in 2017. I believe it's called Der Junge Karl Marx. If I'm not incorrect, it's in German, of course. So Marx was German. Okay, he wasn't Russian. All right, perhaps people might mistake that communism and things that sort is Mother Russia and Russia communist and blah, 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 blah. No, communism originated in Germany. And surprisingly, of course, when we talk about Marx's influence as well, that Germany was divided as East and West Germany when looking into history, and still looking into Karl Marx's expanse of his ideology. It expanded that it expanded in. Of course, its origin was in Germany, and it divided Germany into East and West Germany, and East Germany was a Marxist Germany or a socialist Germany, and or if it's not, I'm not too sure if it was a Marxist or not, but it was a socialist part, which of course I believe it was. So obviously, because the Soviet Union and East Germany had strong ties. And West Germany was, of course, the opposite. Has a lot more stuff. It's just capitalist in nature, and usually just a capitalist place has just a ton more things and a ton more, perhaps sparkly air to the country, compared to a socialist place where it's all about the workers and the people and things of that sort. And when one looks at the DPRK today, commonly known as Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or commonly known as North Korea, one can see the resemblance of the 1950s air of East Germany in DPRK, which the DPRK is a beautiful country. North Korea is commonly known as North Korea, as all of you guys perhaps would know, and especially the media uses that term, of course, a lot. And it is a beautiful place. Pyongyang is beautiful, and the music is beautiful, the culture is beautiful, the food is just, I heard it tastes really good. And perhaps there are quite some exotic food there that a lot of structuralist people who adhere to the structuralist view of the United States, especially the United States, who might hear some exotic cuisine of that country. And structuralism is another topic to talk about, and it is another topic to talk about. I'd love to talk about that as well, since DPRK does serve understandable, so but anyway, I love the DPRK nonetheless, and it's a beautiful country. And the reason why I say it's exotic is because people who are from the West or from whatever country or whatever else who have adapted to a certain way of life, has within their superego, their understanding of what is right and what is wrong, and their structuralist brain, that perhaps they might find it a little exotic. Perhaps for DPRK people, that they don't find it exotic because it's a normal part of life, and that's their structuralist structure in their superego. So you have to understand, that everybody is different. It's as simple as that. And if we can get along together very well, then there wouldn't be any wars in this world, But life is war, so you can't separate life and war, since life is war unless we decide to not make it war. Peace starts with us. Peace starts with us. It's simple as that. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a physicist or astrophysicist who's come up with some formula of string theory or something of that sort to understand how to make world peace, or how to make peace with, at least not world peace, that seems unachievable and impossible, but at least peace from as much as you can with your fellow Homo sapiens. And I heard that there was an argument that that a good man has no enemies and things of that sort. Perhaps it's a very Socratic statement to make as well. But perhaps Marx would disagree that clearly we do. The working class does have enemies, and that is the capitalist, that is the bourgeoisie, that is the bourgeois, the proletarian. The proletariat does have an enemy, and that is the current capitalist mode of production that needs to be reformed, that needs to be changed, that the abolition of class needs to happen. And so I want to talk of that. And there's another concept that Karl Marx talks about as well. And that concept is called class consciousness. Now, class consciousness is being aware or you've come to the realization or the awareness that there is there is rich, there's middle class, there's poor class, and that realizing class consciousness, realizing that there is a problem with that. There's a problem with the rich, with the poor, which divides society up into the peasantry and into gentry and terms like that. That being aware that there are rich and there are poor and there are people and there are also middle class, and having to struggle against the bourgeoisie or the upper class or the ruling class is class consciousness is about the realization of those structures, of those economic structures and social structures, that there's the ruling class, there's the rich people, and they're consuming everything. But what about the poor people? How about them? How about the proletarian or the working class or the proletariats? Why is it that we're divided up? And perhaps we need to do something about this division. Perhaps we need to liberate ourselves from this kind of oppression, from the oppression of capitalism and the capitalist mode of production. So, being class conscious about that, being awakened to class consciousness about that, do something. The workers unite, workers of the world unite, that's the phrase, and you do something about it. You don't just sit down and do nothing. You get up and do something about it. So you've come to the realization of class consciousness. There is poor and middle and rich, and there's no equitability. There's no equity. There's no equality in those things, and they need to be abolished. They need to be abolished, and you do something about it. So the people come together. Workers of the world unite. We all sing the Internationale, and we seize the means of production. It's as simple as that. Because Karl Marx talks about seizing the means of production. That the people must seize the means of production. If you want to establish a society in which there is no rich, there is no poor, but everybody's equal, all of us need to come together. We all need to work. We all need to abolish the ruling class, the upper class, the capitalist mode of production. We need to seize the means of production and establish for ourselves a state in which everybody's equal. There's no poor, there's no rich, but everybody's equal. And that can only happen by the people. And so Marx talks about revolution. And revolution is the transitioning point from capitalism to socialism. And from there on, once that's succeeded, communism would be the next it would be the final utopian state that must be maintained. And that is the issue with perhaps the collapse of communism, is that a communist state can collapse if it is not maintained, if the people stop working, since it is all about work, and it is all about helping each other, and it is all about equality. And that is pure communism. And that is exactly the science of Marxism. Is everything I've just told you. Everything I've just told you is the science of Marxism. The science of Marxism, Leninism as well. And I include Lenin since he was a big part of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, in which he led the people to liberate themselves from Tsarist Russia, or from Imperial Russia. Okay, from Russian imperialism. Okay, are you going to critique me on that? Russian imperialism from what I mean by that is the Tsar, of course, the king. Tsarist Russia. And Vladimir Lenin was the key individual in that. And the people were class conscious. They were awakened to class consciousness, and they decided to do something about it, which then led to the abolition of Tsarist Russia. And I will bring examples now of the ideology of Marxist strategy of Marxist, the Marxist utopia of from a capitalist mode from a capitalist society to a socialist society. The people realize their oppression. The people realize their condition. And once they realize their condition, and once they realize about the ruling class and the rich and the poor and the middle class, and they realize those things, and especially, they realize those things. And you can also top that with surplus value and which exploitation as well, which is exploitation. If you can't survive and you can't provide basic necessities in life, surplus value is exploitive. And the people come to the realization that there is poor, that there is rich, and that's a problem for them. Survivability is no longer an availability. So they awoke. After realizing that there is poor and rich and middle class, and you can't live properly with the condition that you're in, with the surplus value and things of that sort, you're being oppressed and exploited economically. Once you've come to the realization of those things, or you can come to the realization just simply by just looking at the social structure, the economic structure of poor and rich and middle class, that there is something very wrong here, and you come to the realization of that there is no equality involved. There is no equality. And now, once you have come to those realizations, and it really should include surplus value and exploitation and things like that. So, but once you realize your condition, you've come to the awareness of class consciousness. And once you've come to the awareness of class consciousness, you come together as a people, as workers, and workers of the world unite. That's the phrase. And the phrase of workers of the world unite. You workers of the world come together they unite, and they do something about it. They do something about the capitalist mode of production. They, after uniting, after coming together as workers, they begin to seize the means of production. They begin to seize parliament or whatever form of rule that exists in a society. And that's very clear from all revolutions in history. Take it from the guerrilla revolution of guerrilla bandit fighters from Che Guevara and Fidel Castro in Cuba. And the same can be said of course, Vietnam, obviously, as I mentioned. The same can be said of China, and the same can be said of Cambodia, despite it being under the guise of Marxism and not true Marxism in essence. But those are examples of exactly the step-by-step process of Marxism at work. And after the people have seized the place, then it gets transitioned slowly from a capitalist society to a socialist society. And then from there on, you just slowly transition that to a communist society. It's as simple as that. So, but it takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of work when it comes to maintaining a socialist or communist society. It takes a whole lot of work to maintain it. And if you do not maintain it, there is only collapse. Marxism does work, but it takes maintenance and it takes continual labor to continue for the society to thrive and not have it to fall under tyrannical rule or oppressive tyrannical rule, since that is the whole point of escaping, that is the whole point of of establishing Marxism in the first place, was to escape tyranny and oppression and to be free people and to live in a utopia. But perhaps some may argue that it can sometimes have detrimental effects, Marxism can. And that is, of course, if it's not taken care of properly. So maintenance of a society must occur if ever someone wants to continue a communist society with success. It has to be maintained. Otherwise, it's going to collapse. As anything in life, when you don't maintain your body, when you don't maintain your health is going to collapse. Imagine eating cookies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, 365 days of the year, and suddenly your health starts to deteriorate. Exactly, because you didn't maintain your body properly by eating healthy food. The same can be said of a car. You need to maintain your car, or else it's going to break down and fall down and get rusty, and it's going to end up in a junkyard. So the same thing with the communist state or a socialist state. It needs to be maintained by continual labor. If you want a successful socialist state or communist state or Marxist state, the labor needs to continue going and going and going on. It cannot stop. It has to continue. And it is only by the work and by the continual work, by the continual labor, that a communist society can continue forth, that a Marxist society can continue forth. And it is the only way to transition from socialism to communism is by continual labor. I mean, it's pretty obvious in the first place that the whole entire point of having a revolution is that it begins with labor. I mean, you're working in factories and you're working as a wage laborer barely can survive off of that work. In other words, being exploited by those above you. And suddenly coming together as a people to work, of having to seize the means of production, to having to seize the current rule, whether it's the means of production and also the rule, also parliament as well. So you're coming to that work, and you see, ever since the beginning of you acting on class consciousness, ever since the beginning, that cannot come to an end. You have to continue if you want it to be successful. That's the whole point of having a success. That's the whole thing to having a successful, to have Marxism come about successfully in a society, is that it needs to continue in labor. It needs to continue. It cannot stop. Somebody has to continue, or else it could fall under tyranny. It could fall under oppression. And then what happens then? A society begins to deteriorate, just as I said, of keeping your body healthy, and just as I said, of when it comes to maintaining a car and just maintaining anything, it's going to deteriorate if you do not take care of it, if you do not continue laboring. And it could fall under the worst forms of society, such as tyranny. It could fall under it could fall under oppression, which is what the whole point of liberating yourselves in the first place was to begin with. Now you've returned to that. So you have to take Marxism in a heedful way. You have to be mindful or heedful about whether you want to truly implement Marxism in a society. Because if you decide to do that, and you decide to quit at the end, or if you decide to, how about this, not quit, if you decide to quit, or if you decide to stop, there will be detrimental effects. You could fall into tyranny. Society could be chaotic. Society can go. That's why a lot of individuals that's perhaps one of the reasons why the United States wanted to begin the Vietnam War in the first place, was because of the fear of the spread of communism, because they understand that perhaps these detrimental effects of communism can occur. As I've just mentioned, falling back to oppression, which is the whole point of liberating a society, the working class in the first place, ends up falling back into oppression, perhaps even worse than in the first place. So you want to be careful when you take Marxism or Marxism-Leninism into implementation. One has to be careful. One has to be heedful and sure about this process, because it is a process that you cannot stop. You cannot stop if you want it to be. If you want a successful communist or socialist state, you cannot stop working. You have to continue working and working and working, making sure that there's enough food for a society, making sure that everybody, that security, that police are making sure that society is in stable order. Now imagine that if society stops working, there's going to be detrimental effects, of course. Society is going to be chaotic and things of that sort. So when one looks at this, one has to take Marxism in a serious manner. It's not a game you can just play and quit. There will be detrimental effects when you do quit. Chaos. So, you want a successful Marxist state? You want a successful socialist country? You want a successful communist country? You want a successful transition from awakening to class consciousness, to seizing the means of production, to finally acquiring the entire bits of society, and to transitioning that to a socialist and then eventually to a communist state? Maintain it if you want it to continue to thrive. allow that to thrive by continuing to work. Don't stop working. Continue to work. And that is the only way we can that a society can be truly can succeed in a communist state, is if the people just work. It's as simple as that. Just work. Just work. Just do something. Remember, it's one thing to think and it's another thing to do. But we need to learn how to do more instead of think more. Since doing is what gets results done, thinking is also what is the root of action, perhaps one can say. It is where action, it is the very beginning of action, is with our thoughts. As I said, class consciousness, being aware of that fact, that fact comes by thought, and then it can be transitioned into action by doing something about this awakening to class consciousness, that there is poor and rich, and there's an inequality in society, and an exploitive nature of capitalism, and of surplus value to the wage labor. So you need to do something about it. So when one sees Marxism in that light, one needs to be heedful about the potential downfalls of it if it is not continued. Or if you want it to be successful, you have to simply put the work. And this application, now the application of Marxism in a regard of transition from an oppressive state to a socialist state, can occur in different manners. The first manner, of course, is a regular capitalist state, in which the workers are oppressed, they're exploited, they're not getting enough pay, they can't survive for basic necessities, and so the workers come together and protest about that, or do something about that, and they've come. But from a Marxist perspective, it's really coming together. You're being aware, you're being class consciously awake, and then you're coming together, and then you're doing something about it. So, one form of a Marxist liberation is from a capitalist society. The next way of liberation comes from being under a colonial society, in which a hegemonic nation, or a nation which has implemented hegemony on a society. Perhaps we can give an example of history. Of course, this is a true historical thing as to what happened. The French colonized Vietnam, and I've heard there have been horrendous things that have happened under the French colonialism, as from the writings of Ho Chi Minh. You can just search it on Marxist.org and search up Ho Chi Minh's writing archive, and you'll see the kinds of grotesque things that the French would do to the Vietnamese there, and how bad it was. And of course, all forms of colonialism is violent in nature. It just is. I mean, we can just look at it from other countries as well, not just French with Vietnam, but other countries too. But Vietnam, but Vietnam, which was colonized by France at the time, suffered colonialism, and under colonialism, a people can still come to that same exact realization of class consciousness, and in this case, it is the realization of colonialism. It's not necessarily a capitalist realization, but it is a very similar awakening, that you are under you are under a hegemonic nation, a nation which oppresses a society, and that the people should come together, that the workers should still come together, and the people should, and all the people should come together and liberate themselves from that specific colonizer. And that is exactly what Ho Chi Minh and his army did, was liberate Vietnam from the French. And they have been successful about that, coming to the awareness that, oh yeah, we have French colonialists, they are oppressing us and things of that sort. So we must come together and we must do something about it, because that is the only way to truly liberate a nation, is to do something about it. I understand that Mahatma Gandhi would probably have a different method called nonviolence, ahimsa, which is okay. I understand that that's a little bit. It's very. It's very girl like, and it's also very. It's very female like, and it's also very flowery. It's not growth. It's not forceful, or it's not laborious. It's more, okay, I'm gonna tell you guys, stop oppressing us and things of that sort. It really depends on the government of the people, but still, let me tell you this, that every single Marxist revolution that has happened has always has every single Marxist revolution that has come, or a lot of Marxist revolutions that have come about in China, in Russia, in Vietnam, and even in Cambodia, even though they have the guise of Marxism and they're not true Marxists, have come to success in regard to revolution, because it is forceful. It is the law of cause and effect. In order for you to have a true effect, if you want a true effect of victory, you have to fight. You have to physically do something about that. And that is exactly what Frantz Fanon says in regard to in one of his writings, that a revolution, that it must be taken by physical exertion. Physical exertion is necessary. And we see the success of that, as I said, Vietnam, Russia, China, Cambodia, under the guise of communism, under the guise of Marxism. They're all successful. And so, if one wants to liberate oneself from capitalism and colonialism, it is always by the power, it is always by the labor of the wage labor, or by the people, by the proletarian or the proletariat. It is always by their efforts. And when their efforts are continued and non-stop, then they will have a successful revolution. I mean, the war in China lasted a very long time. People's Republic of China versus the Republic of China lasted for a very long time, or it lasted years in order for them to actually take over, in order for the People's Republic of China to be established. Perhaps I got my history wrong when it came to Imperial China, that it was the Republic of China first and then the People's Republic of China. But the reason why I was talking about that in regard to China was because of the last emperor. There was still an emperor who was living at the time when the Chinese proletarians, the Chinese communists were there, living in the forbidden city. So the Republic of China came after Imperial China. And then Mao Zedong fought the Republic of China. And Chinese communists fought them. And successfully won, of course. Because communists, at the end, if continued with victory and continued struggle, have a class struggle, in which, that is another term in which Marx uses, is they wage a class struggle against the ruling class. They wage a class struggle against the capitalist rule, and they also wage a class struggle against colonialism. And in order for that to be successful, that those things to be successful, is that there needs to be continuous labor, continuous efforts, continuous works, as I said. And once you have succeeded in there, you need to continue to maintain that state. The state, it needs to be maintained, or else it's going to collapse. It needs to be maintained. And the countries of today that have been revolutionized by revolutionaries of the past, at least the countries of Vietnam and China, they've, it seemed, switched to a more market economy in recent times, and they've become capitalist with elements of Marxism in them. China's new political ideology is socialism with Chinese characteristics. I think it's pretty fanciful. And with Vietnam, I heard that they've implemented a market economy or some elements of capitalism in them. But Ho Chi Minh thought still remains in rule, since it is one of the most incredible thoughts of human history is Ho Chi Minh thought in regard to colonialism and freeing a people from oppression. I think it's fanciful. I think it's beautiful. So, now at the end of the lecture, I don't want anybody to identify me or box me as a Marxist, but I simply bring ideologies and various beliefs and systems into light, so that way I can educate anybody who is curious about these ideologies and beliefs. Not that I identify with any one of them, but just so that you can understand and sympathize and understand people's different perspectives and people's different thought processes. That this world is not a single world of single individuals, but a diverse world of various political, metaphysical, and psychological structures. And human civilization is perhaps one of the most complex for people to understand. And I just bring it to you in light. I bring it to you in light that there are Marxists, there are democratic socialists, there are conservatives, there are independents, there are imperialists, there are national socialists or Nazis, there are neo-Nazis. There are so many things that we can talk about, but I would like to talk about what I find an incredible ideology in which it can be implemented properly if continued with effort, as I said. Marxism is all about labor and work and oppression and being free from that, being liberated from oppression, whether economic or colonial. So don't box me into any category. I'm only the messenger bringing to you the light of the various different political beliefs and social beliefs and psychological beliefs of humanity.